0 plus 1 este egal cu 1, nu? Nu chiar. Pentru cei neantrenați, 0 plus 1 este egal într-adevăr cu 1. O idee plus inspirație 0 rămâne doar o idee. Dar la Deloitte știm că 0 plus 1 este infinit. De ce? Hai să descoperim împreună universul Deloitte. Să privim un copac care crește dintr-o singură sămânță. Își dezvoltă un trunchi care tinde spre cer, așa că merge în sus și tot mai sus. Tot astfel se dezvoltă și businessul tău. Ca majoritatea dintre noi, are nevoie de un partener care să-l ajute și să-l ghideze. Așa că își dezvoltă două ramuri. Ce avem acum? 1 plus 1. Acum parcă e mai bine. 1 plus 1 trebuie să aibă un scop. Care? Absolut oricare. Atunci când înveți că adunarea înseamnă creștere, nu te oprești doar la 1 plus 1, ci mergi mai departe, mai adaugi 1 și apoi 2 și poate 3 sau 5 și astfel, asemenea spiralei lui Fibonacci, ideea ta de la început este acum o structură stabilă, care se dezvoltă armonios și este capabilă să susțină orice îți propui. Uită-te la păsările cerului. Nu-și bat capul cu legile gravitației. Pur și simplu se duc. Dar este suficient să crești doar în numere? Calea succesului stă în puterea celor mulți, nu și fără viziunea acelui unu de la început. Ochiul furtunii minunate care s-a născut ești tu, o forță a naturii care se îndreaptă spre viitor. Creșterea continuă poate să stagneze, dar nu trebuie să te oprești. Alături de partenerul potrivit, poți descoperi că schimbarea înseamnă progres. De aceea, acel 1 de la început este mereu calm, pentru că știe că 2 și 3 lucrează neobosit alături de el pentru a-l proteja, a-l conecta și a-i forma o rețea de încredere. Așa că, hai să vorbim despre tine. Cine ești tu? În cele din urmă și tu ești rezultatul fericit al unui 1 plus 1, din momentul în care te-ai născut și aduci atât de multă fericire familiei. Ești deja rădăcina unui copac care crește, se dezvoltă, înflorește. De aceea, scopul nostru este să-ți fim alături pentru ca tu să poți să auzi, să simți, să observi. Dincolo de frumusețea din numere, la Deloitte am înțeles că esența succesului sunt oamenii, clienți, colegi, parteneri. Toți suntem o constelație de numere, o constelație de conexiuni. De 30 de ani, acolo unde alții folosesc numerele să explice, noi le folosim să construim. Acesta este universul Deloitte, despre oameni dincolo de numere.
Bună seara și bun venit tuturor! Domnule ministru, dear Sharon, dear Robert, dear Ian, dragi doamne, stimate doamne, stimați domni care ați fondat sau conduceți companii, dragi parteneri, dragi colegi din Deloitte, vă suntem foarte recunoscători că ați decis să fiți alături de noi în această seară specială în care sărbătorim 30 de ani de prezență Deloitte în România. Vă mulțumim din inimă și îi salutăm și pe cei care ne urmăresc live pe zefe.ro și pe Facebook. Este o mare onoare pentru mine să introduc pe invitații noștri speciali, cei care ni se vor adresa în această seară. Sharon Thorne, președintele Consiliului Director Global al Deloitte, domnul Florin Spătaru, ministrul Economiei, care ne va adresa mesajul guvernului, Ian Stewart, economist șef în Deloitte, Marea Britanie, și pe final expertul american în geopolitică Robert D Kaplan, care a călătorit la București special pentru a fi cu noi în această seară. Ne-am întrebat colegii și pe o parte dintre dumneavoastră ce definește istoria noastră de 30 de ani. Și am ajuns atât cu mintea cât și cu inima, în mod natural, la concluzia că parcursul nostru, încadrat de atât de multe cifre, în primul rând de cifrele dumneavoastră cu care ne ocupăm în fiecare zi, este mai presus de toate despre oameni, despre dumneavoastră, liderii comunității de afaceri din România, despre dumneavoastră, reprezentanții autorităților publice, despre voi, dragii noștri colegi pe viață, alumni și colaboratori actuali. Am construit în ultimii 30 de ani un pilon al infrastructurii business-ului românesc, generator de expertiză, de încredere și de conectare, însă mai presus de orice, am construit relații trainice și profunde, am pus suflet în tot ceea ce am făcut și în construcția familiei extinse Deloitte. Suntem cea mai mare organizație de servicii profesionale din lume și cea mai veche, însă, în esență, suntem oameni în serviciul altor oameni, conștienți de privilegiul și de responsabilitatea de a ne dărui pe noi înșine în fiecare interacțiune, în fiecare relație, în fiecare proiect, de a contribui personal și nemijlocit, cu competența, cu integritatea, cu creativitatea, cu dăruirea noastră. Iar evenimentul din seara aceasta este despre aceste relații între oameni și despre recunoștința pe care vă purtăm. În 1992, România încheia capitolul mineriadelor și încă nu-și începuse nici parcursul euroatlantic și nici privatizările sau reformarea economiei. Nu aveam bursă de valori, antreprenorii erau la un început timid de drum, multinaționalele abia începeau să investească în România. Nu prea exista competență contabilă, financiară, de management și nici măcar legături telefonice cu Occidentul, așa cum evoca recent Rick Olcott, partenerul care a fondat biroul din București și care este cu noi în această seară. Dear Rick, welcome and thank you. 30 de ani mai târziu, PIB-ul României este de 10 ori mai mare, bursa de valori are statutul de piață emergentă, suntem membri de încredere ai Uniunii Europene și ai NATO, aparținem High Income Economies conform Băncii Mondiale și parcurgem drumul spre OECD. Economia se bazează pe un mediu antreprenorial matur, vibrant, inovator și pe multinaționale, pe sute de multinaționale care au România ca piață importantă în care generează valoare. Trăim astăzi într-o țară nouă, pe care îndrăznesc să spun, ați construit-o în principal dumneavoastră. Mediul de afaceri, executivi și antreprenori care ați crezut în România, care v-ați asumat cu încrâncenare, cu sacrificiu personal, zi de zi, sarcina de a reclădi economia. Doresc să elogiez în această seară performanțele excepționale ale mediului de afaceri românesc, care în 30 de ani a înfruntat și a depășit nenumărate dificultăți, de la inflație, la crize financiare, recesiuni, austeritate, emigrare masivă, incertitudine legislativă și până mai de curând, pandemie și război la granițe. Dumneavoastră și ceilalți oameni de afaceri din România sunt principalii ctitori ai noii noastre patrii. Un stat de drept care și-a recăpătat locul meritat în Europa, un aliat strategic al Statelor Unite, o economie de piață funcțională și o societate care a optat ferm pentru o democrație liberală. La Deloitte vă mulțumim din toată inima pentru încrederea cu care ne-ați investit în acest proces de refondare a României. Ne-ați adus alături de dumneavoastră în multe sute de tranzacții și voi risca să menționez doar câteva. Preluarea Petrom, a Mobifon, a BCR, a Automobile Craiova, a Olchim sau a CEZ, sau investițiile succesive în Neptune Deep. Am avut șansa să asistăm în mai mult de jumătate din tranzacțiile de peste $1 miliard din această perioadă, însă am pus același suflet în fiecare alt proiect, indiferent de dimensiuni, investirea noastră fiind în oameni dincolo de cifre, în dumneavoastră, cei care contați pe noi, cei care vă bazați pe noi atunci când contează cel mai mult. Alături de autoritățile statului, al căror consultant am fost în multiple proiecte strategice, inclusiv cele privind programarea fondurilor europene sau tranziția energetică, ne-ați oferit șansa să acompaniem adopția și aplicarea legislației europene, reforma fiscalității, adoptarea noilor standarde de contabilitate, raportare, audit, evaluare, în structurarea și în reorganizarea afacerilor atât în perioade de creștere cât și în perioade de dificultate și mai nou în tranzițiile esențiale spre digital și sustenabilitate. Ne-ați încredințat raportările dumneavoastră financiare sau conformarea fiscală sau ne-ați cerut să le audităm sau să le verificăm în context de fuziuni, de achiziții, de finanțări, de listări, de emisiuni de obligațiuni și îndrăznesc să cred că am contribuit la acea infrastructură de încredere care ține lumea afacerilor în mișcare. Am făcut asta cu conștiința că nimic nu este mai important decât integritatea și reputația noastră, cea colectivă și cea personală. În fine, ne-ați mandatat să fim vocea comunității de afaceri în dialogul cu autoritățile publice și am investit zeci de mii de ore de voluntariat în sprijinul diferitelor asociații de business, contribuind la elaborarea legislației și a politicilor publice. Mă întorc la oameni, dincolo de cifre, și la recunoștința pe care o avem pentru relații trainice profunde, de durată. Deloitte România este un business bazat aproape în exclusivitate pe oameni, pe profesioniști care se investesc cu pasiune în munca pe care o fac pentru clienții lor și care mentorează următoarea generație de talente. Unii dintre noi ne-am început activitatea, cariera la Deloitte încă din facultate sau imediat după aceea și suntem încă aici, convinși că ceea ce lăsăm în urmă ne definește. Alții ni s-au alăturat în alte momente și au acumulat o experiență profesională la Deloitte care s-a dovedit esențială pentru devenirea lor, iar astăzi sunt reprezentanți importanți ai mediului de afaceri. Unii dintre ei sunteți în această seară, unii dintre voi, alături de noi și vă mulțumim, suntem mândri de voi și sper că și voi sunteți mândri să aparțineți familiei extinse Deloitte. Deloitte este un univers în continuă expansiune prin asumarea personală de către fiecare dintre noi a provocării de a crește atât ca profesionist cât și ca lider. Într-o măsură sau alta, actul fondator de acum 30 de ani se repetă continuu de către numeroși ctitori de noi competențe, de noi echipe. Am început cu 3 angajați și suntem astăzi aproape 3.000 de profesioniști în cele 9 entități prezente în România. Suntem recunoscători atât predecesorilor mei, Rick Olcott, Brian Late, Mike Bohen, Paul-André Michaud, Maxim Sasli și Ahmed Hassan, precum și fiecărui partener și fiecărui coleg care a răspuns la chemarea noastră de leadership, aceea de a fi cea mai bună versiune a sa și implicit a întruchipa cea mai bună versiune a Deloitte în fiecare interacțiune cu un client sau cu un coleg. Și în felul ăsta, ca fiecare să participe la co-crearea continuă, permanentă, a tot ceea ce înseamnă Deloitte. Tuturor celor care ați pus nu doar timp și efort, dar mai ales suflet în construirea proiectului nostru comun Deloitte România, vă mulțumesc din toată inima și vă felicit pentru tot ceea ce am împlinit împreună. Slujirea voastră este privilegiul vieții mele și vă sunt enorm de recunoscător. La final, permiteți-mi să împărtășesc câteva credințe și speranțe atât despre Deloitte cât și despre România. Sunt convins că Deloitte va continua să crească și să se reinventeze pentru a rămâne relevanți într-o lume în continuă și accelerată schimbare. Știm însă că nu doar companiile, ci și societatea trebuie să evolueze și sperăm să putem contribui ca parte a unui efort orchestrat al autorităților publice, mediului universitar, academic, de cercetare și al comunității de afaceri pentru a construi strategiile și competențele de care această transformare a României are nevoie. Pentru a continua să generăm competențe și să creștem lideri, este nevoie nu doar ca Deloitte să rămână organizația de profil cea mai atractivă pentru absolvenți, ci și ca România să rămână atractivă pentru tinerii educați și mobili. În ultimii 30 de ani am pierdut peste 3 milioane de români și trăim o globalizare tot mai ofertantă pentru capitalul uman. Mi-aș dori ca în discutarea politicilor publice, precum ar fi propunerile de trecere la impozitarea progresivă, să modelăm și acest risc uriaș pentru generații de acum încolo al pierderii de competențe tinere, de oameni pentru care cota unică este un avantaj competitiv esențial al României. Închei revenind la credința noastră profundă în leadership, ca resursa principală a oricărei companii, organizații sau comunități. Așa cum încercăm să insuflăm fiecărui coleg în Deloitte convingerea că poate avea un impact distinctiv prin asumare, prin inițiativă și prin responsabilitate personală, cred că putem și că trebuie să cultivăm aceste valori în toate comunitățile noastre. În numele partenerilor și al colegilor mei, vă mulțumesc din toată inima tuturor celor care ați făcut posibil parcursul nostru de 30 de ani. O poveste despre oameni dincolo de cifre, despre oamenii care au reclădit România, despre dumneavoastră, comunitatea de afaceri din România pe care suntem onorați să o slujim, oameni în serviciul altor oameni, uniți de credința în viitorul țării noastre, pe care îl construim în fiecare zi împreună. Mulțumesc. It is now my great pleasure to ask Sharon Thorne, the chair of our Global Board of Directors, to join me on stage and share the global perspective of Deloitte impact and aspirations. Sharon, thank you so much for having traveled to Bucharest to be with us tonight.
It's wonderful. Thank you. So, huge thank you to Alex for the introduction. Bună seara, absolutely delighted to be here, celebrating 30 years of success and impact of our Romanian Deloitte firm. But I want to share a bit more about our global story with you. The world is facing multiple complex threats and challenges. Disruption has become part of the new normal. Climate, COVID, the war, digitization, energy crisis, all of these things having a significant impact. And the challenge of attaining a just and sustainable future is something that is very complicated and interconnected. And I think leaders have a key role to play by setting the tone and using our influence effectively. And it's crucial that the solutions that we develop consider everybody. We have to act boldly to navigate the transformative change that's needed. And I strongly believe that all businesses have to step up and take action to lead the radical collaboration that is needed between government, business, civil society, academics, to make the change that's needed. Now, Deloitte's purpose, as you know, is to make an impact that matters for our clients, for our people in the communities that we live and work in. And I'm very proud of all that we're doing to help these different groups navigate such a complex environment. But if we take a step back, Deloitte globally has been going for 177 years. We started in 1845, a single man, William Welsh Deloitte, and we are now a $59 billion organization with over 400,000 people in 150 countries. And we're a mosaic of hundreds of different businesses, from tax and legal, audit and assurance, cyber, cloud, AI, human capital, analytics, just the list of services is endless. And, you know, with the scale that we've developed comes huge opportunity, but also responsibility. We have to invest to make a difference, and we do. We're investing to help our clients on the transformation journeys that they need to go on and to help them navigate the complex world. We're investing in our people development to help them be successful, and we're investing in our communities. So I'm going to say a little bit more about each of those. For our clients, you know, we are absolutely committed to help our clients tackle what are very complex challenges. And there are two key areas that I believe will shape our world in the coming generations: technology and climate change. You've seen the huge transformation and advancement in technology and automation, and it has profound implications and opportunity for us and our clients. I've referenced cyber, cloud, AI, and so on. They will influence every sector and industry, and there's been a massive acceleration over the past 2 years. And the role of technology has evolved from automating the business to actually being the business. And we're seeing it in Romania. You know, you've got excellent capability, the core of many of your operations, and you rank 5th among EU member states on the percentage of ITC bachelor's degrees, which will position you really well for the future. And last year you were noted as the birthplace of technology unicorns. But technology is changing the way we work and will have implications on the way we live our lives. Considerations for regulation, privacy, trust. And we've been investing significantly in our breadth of capabilities to help our clients on their transformation. And it's critical that we harness this opportunity that technology brings. It's going to play a key role in solving the problems the world is facing, and climate is a great example. We're seeing huge advances in innovation and the availability of technology aimed at tackling climate change. It will allow us to end our dependency on fossil fuels far earlier than initially thought possible. The past 15 years, you've seen the prices for solar and wind power have plunged 90%. And clean energy sources are growing faster than anyone expected. Batteries are expanding the range of EVs at ever lower costs. And 3D meat printers can produce meat that is genetically indistinguishable from cow beef. Can you imagine how that could transform the $1 trillion annual meat market? We already have lots of the necessary technology, but it's just not always visible or ready to be leveraged. And the green premium is still very high, although with the energy cost increases, it is reducing. And the solutions have to be scaled to make them affordable and usable. So rich nations need to invest heavily to enable us to make them available to the rest of the world. And I think business, all of us, have a key role in identifying, investing in, and delivering projects that will make a difference. A great example in the UK is a joint investment of £400 million announced by Bill Gates and the Catalyst Foundation, which is part of the Breakthrough Energy Network, and the UK government. And they're investing in green hydrogen, long-term energy storage, sustainable aviation fuel and direct air capture, reducing that green premium. And there is no transition unless it is a just one, and it's critical that solutions consider everybody. The second area, just away from technology, climate change itself, it is an existential threat that will shape our world for generations to come. Climate change is already having a devastating impact on the planet. Biodiversity loss, resource exploitation, land degradation, ocean warming, rising sea levels, all of these things are happening faster than scientists predicted. We've got to work to protect these areas, including the Danube Delta, which is home to the 3rd largest biodiversity ecosystem in the world. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, their report earlier this year said 40% of the world's population, that's 3 billion people, are highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Many businesses are already living the stark reality. Deloitte produces a survey of CXOs around the world. 97% said their businesses were already being impacted by climate, and nearly half experienced negative operational impacts due to environmental disasters. Reaching net zero requires the global economy to transform beyond recognition, and doing nothing has a much higher cost. So the Deloitte Economics Institute has produced a number of turning points reports that show the economic impact of action versus inaction. And globally, the figures are very significant. If we take no action, the cost to the global economy could be $178 trillion between now and 2070. Conversely, if we take rapid and coordinated action, we could have $43 trillion in economic gains in the next 50 years. So all businesses are trying to work out the role that they can play. And for more than 20 years, Deloitte has been helping our clients build climate actions into their strategies and operations to mitigate the risks of a warming world. But we can't advise clients if we're not leading the way. So last month, we announced a $1 billion investment in our sustainability and climate practice to strengthen and expand the services that we provide to clients, to develop more data-driven research, and to invest in assets and capabilities. And we're also working hard to get our own house in order. So our global strategy is World Climate, and it's based on 2 pillars: actions that we will take and actions we will inspire. So actions we'll take, we've committed to net zero by 2030. We're embedding sustainability into all of our operations, and we're working with our suppliers to encourage them to adopt science-based targets in the next 5 years. And then actions we will inspire. We have 400,000 people. We reference them as our superpower, and we've given them all training to get them to think about making responsible choices. We're also engaging our ecosystems. We have a unique role to bring together businesses, governments, NGOs across industries and geographies. So a good example, last year we entered into transactions with 6 airlines to buy sustainable aviation fuel to reduce emissions from our employee air travel. So together with other businesses doing it with us, we are acting as a catalyst to the producers of sustainable aviation fuel to say there is a market, people do want to buy it, you need to invest. And then using technology and digitization. In the Netherlands, we've been working with the Worldwide Fund for Nature's Early Warning System project to help prevent illegal deforestation through an AI solution that predicts where illegal deforestation will be happening next, based on satellite images. So lots of examples where we're making a difference, supporting clients. But we're a people business. People are the fundamental underpin of Deloitte. And the world of work is changing incredibly fast. It's been accelerated by the pandemic. We've seen the rapid advancement in digitization and technologies impacting, help at supporting a new hybrid workplace, but also making people rethink what they want and how they want to work. You know, almost all the leaders I speak to say that the talent is their number one challenge. There's no silver bullet. It's going to take a range of actions to enable us to attract and retain the best people. So we've put in place, flexible working arrangements. We've said our hybrid working model is standard. We're investing in our physical and digital workplaces. And we're putting people development at the heart of so much of our investment in our people, helping them to be successful and achieve their ambitions. And we're also rethinking reward, going beyond salary. But culture is a critical element of being able to attract and retain the very best people. So we have something called our all-in strategy, which is all about increasing women in leadership. It's about the LGBT plus agenda. We've added disability, and it's obviously race is also critical, and we're focusing on mental health and well-being. Globally, we've set a goal of 30% of our partners being women by 2025 and 40% of our women in leadership positions. And the global board, I'm very proud to say, has got 38% women on it, up from 16% 3 years ago. But culture is critical to achieving these goals. And our Millennial and Gen Z survey that we published earlier this year, they want to work for purpose-led organizations. 2 in 5 Millennials and Gen Zs have rejected a job and or an assignment based on their personal ethics. And they're actively seeking to influence policy and business actions on matters that are important to them, particularly in relation to environment and equality. Just coming to communities, there are profound challenges and inequities that are persisting, which have been exacerbated by the pandemic, by the war, by global migration emergencies and climate change, and that gap is widening. I think we have a responsibility to challenge ourselves to make things much better and to work with government and civil society to create a future that works for everyone. And we're committed at Deloitte to playing our part. And I just wanted to touch on what's been happening in Deloitte around the Ukraine response. We work and support our communities all year round, including during times of adversity and crisis. And since the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, Deloitte has stood unequivocally with the people of Ukraine. We've taken every possible action to ensure the safety of our colleagues in Ukraine and their families, and we've supported the wider communities impacted. Under the Deloitte Foundation, we've seen a tremendous effort from our firms around the whole world, and I'm so proud of that collective and coordinated response. We've raised funds and provided financial as well as volunteer support to various NGOs in the region. And as an additional support, our tech team has created a chatbot, Irene, which can be immediately used by NGOs to help connect with refugees. And our employees have pursued their own initiatives, helping with transport, providing goods, donating blood, and they've opened their homes for the refugees and provided support and care. And in Deloitte, Romania, the foundation here, together with staff from our business units, offered to support refugees entering Romania by organising transport, temporary accommodation, then helping them find more permanent accommodation, helping them, psychological, financial support, and legal aid and counselling. So we've helped nearly 30 employees and almost 50 members of their families. And for those refugees now in Romania, in partnership with World Vision, Deloitte has created child-friendly spaces as part of the Happy Bubble project. So I'm so proud of the many things that our amazing teams have done, and I do want to take this opportunity to thank the team in Romania. So in closing, I do want to close in a spirit of optimism, hope, and belief that we will overcome the challenges that we're facing if we act together, if we act now, and if we leverage and develop the technology that is needed. And Deloitte is absolutely committed to playing our part, as I'm sure you as leaders and parents are too. Every one of us has the responsibility to act and not underestimate the individual impact that we can have. Now is the time to ask ourselves, what more can we do as a group, as human beings and business leaders, to create the kind of world we want to leave for the next generation? Thank you.
Dear Sharon, thank you so much for your perspective, and thank you for inspiring partners and colleagues in separate meetings today. It is indeed a privilege to be part of our global firm. Este o deosebită onoare în acest moment să-l invit pe domnul Florin Spătarul, ministrul economiei, să ni se alăture și să se adreseze aceste importante reuniuni a mediului de afaceri din România. Domnule ministru, vă mulțumim foarte mult că sunteți alături de noi și vă vom asculta cu multă atenție.
Dear Alex, dear Madam Chair, dear Professor Kaplan, doamnelor și domnilor, vă mulțumesc mult pentru invitație, mă simt onorat să vă transmit în numele Guvernului României sincere felicitări pentru împlinirea celor 30 de ani de prezență Deloitte în România. Îndrăznesc să spun că Deloitte a crescut odată cu România democrată, iar acest lucru se vede astăzi prin evoluțiile pozitive ale țării noastre către o economie de piață, o societate democratică integrată pe deplin și adaptată la gândirea europeană. Presa internațională titrează Deloitte ca fiind cea mai mare firmă de servicii profesionale din lume. De altfel, conform unei analize pe care am văzut-o recent în ziarul financiar, Deloitte este în vârful clasamentului și în România. Așadar, repet, felicitări și mult succes în continuare. Pentru mine, pentru cetățenii români, dar și pentru economia României, prezența și activitatea celor 3.000 de angajați Deloitte în România contează enorm. Aproape jumătate dintre cei care construiesc astăzi proiectul, conceptul Deloitte, sunt tineri IT-ști care oferă consultanță din România pentru întreaga Europa. Poate pentru multe țări europene poate părea surprinzător, dar noi știm că în România potențialul tinerilor care pot și care fac astăzi performanță în domeniu este uriaș. Unii dintre acești tineri au ales să revină în România pentru a fi parte din provocarea profesională pe care Deloitte le-a oferit-o. Iar acest lucru este de admirat. Este un exemplu și vă felicit pentru asta. Știu că aveți în plan să dublați numărul de personal în domeniul IT în următorii 2 ani și să diversificați oferta de servicii, bazându-vă pe fantastica resursă umană locală existentă. Astăzi, ca ministru al economiei și reprezentant al guvernului, vă declar întreaga mea susținere și mă bucur că proiectați un astfel de obiectiv pentru viitorul Deloitte, dar și pentru viitorul României, căci, așa cum îmi place mie să spun, în România începe industria viitorului. Experimentăm astăzi, precum multe alte țări europene, provocarea adaptării la noi condiții de viață, noi condiții de activitate socială și profesională și, cel puțin după testul solidarității pe care l-am trăit cu toții în pandemie, am descoperit nevoia de a ne adapta la o viață mult mai conectată la digital. Administrația publică din România trebuie să se adapteze și să implementeze noile metode de lucru digitalizate pentru a fi în concordanță cu noile realități și pentru a fi, firește, eficientă pentru comunitate. Este nevoie de predictibilitate și transparență în relația cu mediul de afaceri. Ca ministru al economiei și reprezentant al Guvernului României, îmi doresc să încurajăm cât mai mult dezvoltarea antreprenorilor locali și a capitalului autohton. De asemenea, este important să rămânem o destinație atractivă pentru investitorii străini și să consolidăm companiile unde statul este acționar. Aniversarea dumneavoastră vine într-un moment la nivel global și regional plin de provocări. Criza sanitară, criza climatică, cea energetică, la care se adaugă agresiunea militară în apropiere de granițele României, sunt provocări care pun la încercare capacitatea statelor de a răspunde și de a se adapta acestora. Aștept cu interes analiza domnului profesor Kaplan în legătură cu situația actuală globală, însă personal vă mărturisesc că sunt optimist că vom trece cu bine peste această situație dificilă cu care ne confruntăm. Niciodată în istoria noastră nu am avut garanțiile de securitate pe care le avem acum, ca țară NATO și membra Uniunii Europene, bazându-ne mult pe Armata Națională, care a început de ceva timp un amplu proces de modernizare și transformare. Suntem o țară stabilă și sigură, inclusiv din punct de vedere al siguranței personale. Există, deci, fundamentele pe care să accelerăm modernizarea și dezvoltarea economică a României. Continuăm să avem una dintre cele mai mari creșteri din Uniunea Europeană. Este bine că se întâmplă așa și mi-aș dori ca în anii următori această creștere economică să fie generată în cea mai mare măsură de investiții. Aceste investiții pot fi impulsionate de către fondurile europene pe care le avem la dispoziție, dar și de existența și eficiența unui parteneriat onest cu mediul de afaceri. În momente de criză este nevoie mai mult ca oricând să fim solidari și uniți, să ne ascultăm, să ne înțelegem, să ne ajutăm. Crizele actuale au arătat că trebuie să producem mai mult în România, să regândim, să reintegrăm industrii, să reducem deficitul comercial. E nevoie să fim orientați către viitor, să accelerăm digitalizarea, să accelerăm modernizarea și dezvoltarea infrastructurii, să facem o tranziție energetică inteligentă care să nu expună pe consumatori. De asemenea, să considerăm educația și inovarea ca fiind priorități naționale. Doamnelor și domnilor, sunt multe de spus, însă și timpul este o resursă limitată. Înainte de a-și încheia, aș dori să mulțumesc Deloitte pentru faptul că este și rămâne un partener al României. Cu expertiza pe care o aveți, ne-ați ajutat de peste 15 ani să gestionăm mai bine fondurile structurale europene, să planificăm o tranziție energetică și ecologică inteligentă sau să modernizăm și eficientizăm administrația. Impactul sutelor de manageri formați în Deloitte, care lucrează în alte companii sau chiar în instituții, merită menționat. Sunteți nu numai o firmă de consultanță, ci și o instituție de formare profesională de prestigiu, sunteți un concept inspirațional. Vă mulțumesc încă o dată pentru invitație, aniversare plăcută și continuați să credeți în potențialul României. Vă mulțumesc!
Domnule ministru, vă suntem extrem de recunoscători pentru aprecierile și încurajările dumneavoastră și vă mulțumesc foarte mult în numele tuturor invitațiilor noștri pentru prezența în această seară și vă rog să rămâneți alături de noi. Sunt convins că foarte mulți invitați ar dori să interacționeze personal cu dumneavoastră și sper că și pentru dumneavoastră poate fi o bună ocazie să luați pulsul comunității de afaceri din România. Vă mulțumim din inimă.
Mulțumesc și promit că rămân până la sfârșit.
Vă mulțumim foarte, foarte mult. And now I'd like to invite another distinguished guest, Ian Stewart, our chief economist from the UK, who has kindly traveled to be with us tonight. Ian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, Minister, Alex, guests and Deloitte colleagues, it is a real pleasure to be here today to mark, a very, very significant landmark for Deloitte here in Romania. As an economist, I'd observed that the Deloitte business over the last 30 years has grown in tandem with the, frankly, remarkable growth of the Romanian economy. The economy and our business have prospered together. And what I want to do today is just reflect, as an economist, on the themes that have shaped the world that Deloitte has come of age in the last 30 years, and to think about what the future might offer. And I suppose the world since 1992 has been a period of very rapid technological advance, of globalization and economic integration. And I think Deloitte and Romania's role in the European Union testifies to that. And you think of the extraordinary integration that took place in Europe between 1992, the year that Rick established Deloitte in Romania, and today. The single market, the European single market, was founded in 1992. 7 years later, we saw the creation of the single currency, and then, of course, the historic enlargement of the EU, and then, of course, in 2007, the entry of Romania and Bulgaria into the EU. And, we should remember this was a period of economic and political integration that has never been seen in European history. It was a remarkable achievement. And, of course, outside Europe, important things were happening. China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, and other emerging markets opened up, and it paved the way for a boom in emerging markets which lifted billions of people out of poverty and created a source of deflation in the global economy, which helped keep inflation low in the West for almost 2 decades. As an economist, the extraordinary thing is that when I first became an economist, we worried a lot about inflation. For a lot of the last 15 years, not now, we've worried more about deflation. And of course, there's been huge innovation with the internet, telephony, cloud, social media, online shopping going mainstream, and costs collapsing. And most of the dominant names in today's tech scene, Tesla, Alibaba, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Tencent, they're younger than Deloitte is in Romania. Now, this hasn't been an easy time, and I think that for you leaders running businesses for Deloitte in Romania, there have been challenges to navigate too. The dot-com crash of 2001. At the time, it seemed like a really big event. We then had the financial crisis in 2008-9, the Euro crisis, the pandemic. You know, the downturns of the last 15 years have been bigger than anything the world has seen since the 1930s. So we shouldn't think of the last 30 years as being a period of just continuous growth. There's been huge shocks. Although I think governments and central banks have just done a much better job of handling those shocks in the last 15 years than they did in the 1930s, and we've ended up with much lower unemployment and a lesser effect on living standards. So I think if we look back at the last 30 years, it's been a period of strong global growth, increasingly coming from Asia and from Central and Eastern Europe, countries like Romania. It's been a time of lower unemployment, ever lower unemployment, a race for talent, cheap money, low inflation, and rising asset prices. You know, if you put $100 into the US S&P index in the year Deloitte was founded, it would be worth $1,000 today. If you put it into the NASDAQ, the tech sector, it would be worth about $2,000. And if you'd had the good fortune to invest in Apple, which I didn't, it would be worth about $30,000. So these cheap interest rates, these low interest rates, the strong growth, rising asset prices, that's the world in which Deloitte in Romania came of age. Now, the future's clearly going to be different, and it's obvious that in three ways the future's going to be different. The first is, of course, that superpower rivalries that we in the West thought had died at the end of the Cold War, China's embrace of the market, those rivalries are back. Defense spending is increasing globally. NATO's expanding. President Xi has shifted China to a very assertive position in the world compared to his predecessors. And once again, China, Russia, and the West are strategic rivals. The second change is that globalization has slowed. And in some areas, it's gone into reverse. Just think of Brexit in the UK, or the way in which the US and China, in terms of technology, are increasingly decoupling. Now, globalization is far, far too useful to us all for it to die, but it faces new frictions and new challenges. And of course, the third change is inflation. It's back. Inflation in the US is at the highest level since 1981. In Germany, the European country which taught us the benefit of low inflation, a country which had a central bank determined to control inflation and avoid a repeat of the hyperinflation of the interwar period. In Germany, inflation is at because the 1920s were a booming decade because partly of that lift from technology. So it was a J curve. It was a situation where initially a weak response to invention gathered pace and took off. And those kind of breakthroughs and innovations, they need to be combined with new investment in business processes, in skills, in intangible capital before we can lift growth rates. Now, I think the takeoff phase for technology is happening now with a cluster of new technologies, above all artificial intelligence, which combined with cheap data storage and improvements in computing power are allowing firms to address challenges from vision and speech to prediction and diagnosis. There are huge innovations happening in biomedical sciences and energy. The price of new solar panels are far more efficient and cost effective than alternative new sources of fossil fuel powered. The mRNA vaccine against COVID, the one developed by biotech and exploited by Pfizer, mRNA enables us to reprogram our cells to mount an immune response to almost any invader, including perhaps cancer. And those mRNA vaccines can be made rapidly and cheaply. We've learned that in the last 2 years. And above all, I think we should believe that technology and communications and data are going to go on doing what they've done for the last 30 years. They're going to get cheaper and more ubiquitous. But to harness these benefits, I think two things need to change. We need to see a restructuring of production and processes. And we are seeing a real rethink of how we organize work, about where work happens, and actually how we consume. Online has advanced in a way that I don't think anyone could have anticipated 2 years ago during before the pandemic. And more people than ever are working remotely. In my country, the UK, with lockdowns long since passed, more than a third of the workforce is either working some or all the time at home. That is a huge change. And I believe with the technologies we have now and will have in the future, we have a chance to rethink how and where we work on a scale that has not been seen since the creation of the modern production line, Henry Ford's production line, or the modern office in the early 20th century. And the second big change, and Sharon talked about it, is the switch to renewables. Now, that's been driven so far by huge environmental risks. But events in Ukraine demonstrate too that there is a geopolitical imperative in energy independence. And that is going to require investment and a reorganization over many years on a truly vast scale. Now, what I know as an economist is that if you look back at energy transitions, the move from water and animal power to steam power in the 19th century, the switch from steam to electric and the internal combustion in the 20th century, we know that those changes reshape business and society and they raise growth. Railways help make modern nation states in Europe. In the UK, the creation of railways gave us, for the first time ever, a single time across the whole of the UK. Cars led to the modern suburbs. Jet engines facilitated cheap mass transport. Energy transitions, and we are in the midst of an energy transition. And I think it'll be the fastest and most complete energy transition in history, remake economies. So if we put these three things together, new technologies, the effect of technology on the way we work, and the economic revolution driven by the climate transition, I could believe that we can drive a more prosperous future. It's often said that economists are pessimistic, and the 19th century Scottish philosopher Thomas Carlyle, he famously called economics the dismal science. Now, Carlyle was wrong. Because economics, no matter how much economists might pretend otherwise, is not a science. And as I look to the future, nor do I think its conclusions dismal. As I've tried to show, I think nations and business such as Deloitte have had to negotiate remarkable change and huge shocks in the last 30 years. And I've been, as an economist, have been very struck by the success and the resilience of businesses and systems in coping with these shocks. Now, we have big challenges today, and we understand that. Above all, challenges related to security and economic stability. Without low and stable inflation, we cannot grow economies in the long term. So there are challenges. But equally, I believe the opportunities that I've discussed this evening are just as great as those that Deloitte and Romania jointly saw 30 years ago when Deloitte was set up here. So, as I think ahead to Deloitte's 60th anniversary in Romania, and actually I checked, Alex, before I came here, but the 60th anniversary is going to fall on a Sunday. So I suggest that we hold it on Friday, the 28th of June, 2052. and I'm looking forward to an invitation. But I think when we have that celebration, or those who are here, will be able to look back with the same sense of achievement and pride that we can do today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ian. Those were wonderful insights and a great perspective. And now the moment that all of us have been eagerly looking forward to. I have the honor, the privilege to invite on the stage Professor Robert D. Kaplan, world-acclaimed author, expert in geopolitics, and one of the biggest, most important, most influential thinkers of our time. Thank you so much for having crossed the ocean for us. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure and privilege to be here with all of you today. My first trip to Romania was in 1973, and I was here often in the 1980s, the most difficult decade in Romania's 20th century history, except for maybe the World War I years. And I've been coming back periodically since then. And on my first visit, it wasn't so bad, but starting in the 1980s, I remember bread lines at 4 in the morning for people lining up for stale bread. I saw boulevards that were empty because there were very few cars. So I have seen visually how this country has changed so dramatically in a positive direction gradually through all the crises over the past 33 years exactly. You know, Romanians may complain about life, but the way I look at it as an historian, Romania has missed many of the great catastrophes of this part of the world since the fall of the Berlin Wall. It did not fall into ethnic war like Yugoslavia. It did not fall into temporary chaos here and there like Bulgaria and Romania, and like Bulgaria and Albania. And it did not have the massive economic crisis of Greece a little over a decade ago. It missed the refugee flow for the most part about 5 years ago. So all of the catastrophes bypassed Romania. So it's become an island of stability where thankfully it has become boring, where nothing happens except steady growth. Because a successful country, or a country that's going places, are places where it's a bit boring and the average person does not discuss politics. And that is really where we are now. However, what I have to talk about tonight is the world beyond Romania, which is very, very troubled. And let me start this way. In 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell, and the Ceausescus were executed, there was very little internet except among some, specialist communities. There was no iPhones, no smartphones, nothing, no social media. The whole world the whole electronic world that we today take for granted essentially did not exist at that time. And so we entered upon what I call globalization 1.0. And globalization 1.0 was essentially a good news story. It was about the spread of democracy. It was about the spread and creation of middle classes in large parts of the developing world and the former communist world. It was about free trade. It was about, the unleashing of information technology. It was a unipolar world where the United States was the top dog, essentially. And that allowed for the creation of these technological engines like Apple and Microsoft and Google to really take hold and grow and innovate and change our world. So globalization 1.0 is a good news story. And we thought that was globalization. But you know, historians love chapter breaks, as artificial as they are. And COVID-19 was a chapter break, essentially. And after COVID-19, in the latter stages of COVID-19, we have really entered into what I call globalization 2.0. And globalization 2.0 is not such a good news story. It's been about the return of autocracy in many parts of the world. It's been about the rise of populism. It's been about middle-class fears and alienation. It's been about closing off free trade. It's been, and most importantly, globalization 2.0 has brought us into a world of great geopolitical fractures between the United States and Russia, between the United States and China, essentially. And with the war in Ukraine, we've really re-entered the groove of history as far as Central Europe is concerned, Central and Eastern Europe is concerned. There was a great American historian of about 120 years ago named Henry Adams. And Henry Adams was the great-grandson of the second president of the United States, John Quincy Adams. And he was the grandson of the sixth president, John Quincy Adams. John Adams was the second president. And Henry Adams wrote in 1907 that Russia is and always will continue to be the great challenge of Europe. And will always be at the center of European drama. And right at 7 years after he wrote those words, World War I happened. And the great battles of World War I, Tannenberg and what is today Poland, happened between Germany and Russia. And the collapse of the Russian army at Tannenberg led to the Russian Revolution, and that in turn changed our world, very dramatically. The great battles of World War II, the greatest battles were all on the Eastern Front between Nazi Germany and, guess what, the Soviet Union, or Russia and its ethnic compatriots in its imperialist federation, so to speak. And then you had the Cold War. That led to the Cold War when the Soviet Union essentially took control of the eastern half of Europe, including Romania. And that led to the Cold War. And the Cold War went on for 44 years. So Adams was proven correct. After the Cold War, you had what I call an historical interruption. Because of the way that the Soviet Union collapsed, left Russia weak, disorganized, and in semi-chaos for about a decade. In fact, we all look back on the NATO's Balkan interventions in the 1990s, in 1995 in Bosnia, in 1999 in Kosovo. We have to remember, though, that those interventions only happened in the way they did because Russia was so weak and could do nothing about it. Because historically, the Balkans were part of a Russian sphere of influence, going back through the 19th century. So it was Russian weakness that led to the dramatic NATO interventions in the Balkans. And then in the decade following, you had the distraction of the 9/11 wars, the attacks of 9/11 on the United States, the U.S. intervention in Afghanistan in 2001, the intervention in Iraq in 2003, because we were under the illusion that that constituted the next strategic threat, because the United States ruled over a unipolar world, essentially. Well, now we're back to history. And we're really back to empire, too. Because empire is only a dirty word in the West. It's, you know, in Britain, in the United States, in Europe, empire is seen in a negative way. But in Russia, in China, looking back on the various Chinese empires, in Turkey, in Iran, those countries looking back on their empires, and on it goes. Empire is seen with pride and is looked up upon. So, in order to understand the world today, we have to look into the imperial traditions of quite a number of great powers and middle-level powers. And Romania, of course, Romania's history, its challenge, its tragedy, has been that it has been at the crossroads of empires. The central and northwestern Romania was under the Austro-Hungarian Habsburg Empire. The southern part of Romania was under Ottoman Turkish influence. Romania was, in one way or another, intervened or invaded, including Bessarabia, by Russia almost a dozen times in its history. So there are no lessons here that I can give you about Romania in that sense. Here is the world today. We have two great heartland powers that are autocracies, China and Russia. And then we have the Rimland, what a great Dutch-American geopolitical analyst of the 1940s, Nicholas Spykman, called the Rimland, which was Europe and East Asia, married, in alliance with the North American continent. So you have North America, Europe, and the democracies of East Asia essentially facing off against the great heartland autocracies of Russia and China. And that is the geopolitical face of the world today, is, as complicated as it is. But then we have, when I look through European history, and people wonder, how could Ukraine, with the devastation of infrastructure that has occurred there in the past few months, with the loss of lives, with Ukraine's history of, let's be honest, of corruption, of weak institutions, how could Ukraine ever be part of Europe, of the EU, of NATO? And looking back over 2,000 years of European history, my answer is very easy. Because Europe has changed on the map continually, going back to late antiquity. And remember, Europe used to be the Mediterranean. North Africa, people spoke Latin up until the 7th century. So for several hundred years after the collapse of the Roman Empire, North Africa was still all Latin speaking. It was only a war between the Persians and the Turks that weakened them both, that allowed the Arabs to invade North Africa, take over North Africa, and the result was that Europe moved northwards into Germany and France, and that led to the Dark Ages, to the Medieval Ages, to the Christian empires, and to the gradual evolution of the West as we know it today. More recently, Europe has been moving east. The expansion of NATO in the 1990s and the 2000s, the expansion of the EU eastward in the 2000s, all essentially moved Europe eastward. And if Europe moves even further eastward, it would not be unusual considering the convulsions and cataclysms in Europe. Remember, the Magyars in Hungary came from the Ural Mountains in today's central Russia, in Siberia. The whole Slavic migration from Poland south to Bulgaria occurred in the 5th to 6th centuries from the east, from Central Asia. So Europe has always been dramatically affected by its periphery, and we're seeing that today in the Ukraine, in the war with Ukraine. So I would say keep all options open in terms of where Europe is going, and of course Romania is at the heart of things. Once again, the Black Sea, like the South China Sea, like the Baltic Sea, is a zone of conflict, of competition between great powers, and Romania is is very much at the center of all of this. And you could see it. It's just geography shows it. Some of the grain that cannot be exported through the Black Sea because of the Russian embargo is being trucked to Galatia, to Galatz, to Constanza, so that it can be exported by sea from here. And that's just a small, a small drop of what could come in the future, in the future years, as Romania occupies increasingly center stage in this conflict-ridden world. We also have the Ukraine war. The Ukraine war could go on for many more months or years, but it could end dramatically too. There's a theory that's now very popular in the newspapers, that Ukraine will become a frozen conflict, like South Ossetia, like Abkhazia, like Transnistria, and other places. That's actually an optimistic scenario, because a frozen conflict it implies the cessation of battle, the end of battle, just no solution, essentially. Like the Korean War, the Korean Peninsula, since 1953, has been a frozen conflict, essentially. But all these places, Abkhazia, South Ossetia, Transnistria, they're small places where only a few thousand or a few hundred troops are involved. In Ukraine, you have a great power that has enough nuclear weapons to destroy the United States in 30 minutes, actively involved fighting. You have the United States and NATO allies pouring in tens of billions of dollars of weaponry. You have a lot of moving parts. And because there are a lot of moving parts and there's so much at stake, be aware that this may not turn into a frozen conflict. We could have real dramatic events going forward. And of course, that's not all. Let me turn to China and East Asia for a bit, because despite the Ukraine war, despite the aura of the appearance of the Biden administration being totally focused on Ukraine, the fact is it isn't. In Washington, in the Pentagon especially, the main focus is still on China. China is seen in Pentagon language as the pacing power, the power that we measure ourselves against. The whole Pentagon, the building as it is called inside it, is dedicated to fighting China, to fighting a war with China. That's how it's oriented. Will the U.S. and China be in a Cold War or a state of quasi hostility for years to come? I would answer yes. And the reasons are several. One is trade. If you notice that all the trade restrictions put on China by the Trump administration have been maintained by the Biden administration. They have not been relaxed at all. The Biden administration's trade policy towards China is essentially the Trump administration's trade policy towards China. So there's no relaxation on that front. Then there's military. For the Chinese, the South China Sea and the East China Sea are for them what the Caribbean Sea was for the United States in the late 19th and early 20th century. I've actually had a Chinese senior colonels tell me in meetings in China that they say, you Americans have nothing to complain about. We're doing nothing in the South China Sea that you Americans did not do in the Caribbean 120 years ago. They see these, the South and East China Seas as their blue water extension of their continental landmass, of their natural territory. And they view U.S. Navy destroyers, cruisers, aircraft carriers, etc., as hegemonic and imperialistic by coming from half a world away to these waters. Obviously, the U.S. military sees it 180 degrees differently. The United States has been actively involved in the Pacific since 1853, when Commodore Matthew Perry opened up Japan for trade. The U.S. fought a long war in the Philippines at the turn of the 20th century. There was World War II in the Pacific. There were the Vietnam Wars, the war in Korea. The only U.S. Navy aircraft carrier strike group based not in the U.S. is based in Asia, in Japan. So from the point of view of the Pentagon, the South and East China Seas are their home waters. They are Asian powers. They are an Asian power, and they're not prepared to budge 1 inch. Then there's cyber. Cyber may be a positive element in the business community. In terms of the U.S.-China Cold War, it's completely negative, because there is already, I would call it, a hot cyber war going on between the two powers. The Chinese have hacked into the Pentagon's personnel system, into the U.S. Navy's ship maintenance logs, into the production systems of aircraft, of fighter jets and Navy warships in the United States. And the U.S. is prepared to respond in kind. This has been going on for several years without any alleviation of this. Keep something in, and then there's ideology, which is very important. For about 35 years, China was an enlightened, risk-averse, collegial, authoritarian regime where its leaders maintained strict retirement limits. And this was a China that the U.S. business community was very comfortable with, the American media was comfortable with, where Congress was comfortable with. That China does not exist anymore. China has become a hardcore authoritarian state under a one-man personality cult under Xi Jinping. And guess what? China has no friends left in Washington, essentially. So that China is gone, and the new China breeds total hostility in Washington. Now, one thing I'd like to say that's very important and why the Pentagon focuses so much on China despite the Ukraine war, and that is, there were wars in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria, in Yemen. They had no effect on the stock markets, on Western stock markets, basically. The war in Ukraine has a modest effect. It's a modest drawdown. If there was a military conflict, even one lasting a few days in the South China Sea or the East China Sea, financial markets in the West would be devastated because you'd have the specter of the world's three largest economies, U.S., China, Japan, fighting a high-end warfare with the most advanced battle networks. And therefore, because the stakes are so high, the concentration in Washington, despite Ukraine, is still on China and the West. Just to, to go forward a bit, keep in mind, we live in a very claustrophobic world. We're going from 7.7 billion people to 11 billion people at the end of the century. And more of humanity lives in urban settings. And urban settings are much more difficult and complex to govern. Government has gotten harder, not easier. The risk is not dictators or totalitarians. That's what the media concentrates on. The risk is anarchy and maintaining basic order in large parts of the developing world. And social media is not helpful in this regard. People ask me about the future of the United States, and I say that the United States was a very successful mass democracy in the print and typewriter era, lasting essentially from the American Revolution to the mid-late 20th century. But the digital video era is something completely different. It's impossible to imagine Donald Trump except in the digital video age. Social media is about passion, and passion is the enemy of analysis. And passion does not lead to clear thinking, clear, moderate thinking. And that is the challenge ahead. A world of 11 billion people in a social media age, living in complex, in many parts of the world, badly governed urban settings. So there's going to be a lot of disruption in the world. But look, you've seen, we've had a lot of disruption throughout the Cold War, throughout the post-Cold War. We've had, massive warfare in the Middle East. We've had democratic, attempts throughout the Middle East that have failed. You've witnessed this horrific war right next door in the former Yugoslavia in the 1990s. And Romania has been an island of stability, essentially. And so this can continue, essentially. And the biggest change that I've seen is I remember the Romanian countryside in 1990. I made a trip of 2 months throughout the countryside in April and May 1990. And this was 3 months after the Ceausescus were executed, and 3 months is not long enough to make any kind of a change. The first elections were only held in the spring of 1990, and the countryside was devastated. It was like going back to the 19th century. And you go to the countryside today with the highways, the wineries, the cottage industries, the light industries, the development of cities throughout the country, and it's a new world. It's a completely different new world. And this is part of the magic of the European Union. Because without membership in the European Union, this could not have happened. NATO is only about military, but the European Union is about daily life and standards and institutions, essentially. And membership in the European Union has totally remade Romania. And as someone who came, who wrote about it very negatively in my book Balkan Ghosts of 1993, and then came back in 2013, 14, 15 to publish a book that was totally optimistic about Romania in 2016, I've really lived and seen the changes. So at the end of the day, despite the cataclysms to come that will occur in many parts of the world, there's significant hope that Romania will not be at the end of Europe, that it will have a member of Europe next door in Ukraine. So, as I said, it's basically been a good news story since 1989, and there's no reason why it can't continue. People ask me, what's the most important thing Romania can do? Can it negotiate better, more tougher with NATO, with the West, the way Erdogan, President Erdogan of Turkey has been negotiating, dropping his opposition to Sweden and Finland entering NATO? I said, no. That's not the way forward. The way forward is to develop governmental capacity. That is still the challenge of Romania. As comparatively weak governance and institutions that need to be stronger. The stronger institutions are, the stronger government is, Romania can then punch above its weight, as we say in slang in the United States. And I always use the example of Singapore. Lee Kuan Yew's Singapore had no oil, no natural gas. It was completely empty of natural resources. It existed. It was born as one of the poorest new countries of the world in the 1960s, surrounded by much bigger hostile forces, Indonesia and Malaysia. And yet Singapore became a place not just where the Western business community wanted to do business, but where it actually wanted to be based. And that has to be the goal of Romania. How can we be more like Singapore as we go forward? Because the combination of Black Sea geographical position and better governance, better institutions, is a win-win situation. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you enormously from the bottom of our hearts, Professor Kaplan. You have certainly set us thinking, and I'm sure that most of our guests would like to ask questions, but I suggest we do that in the garden, where we will move in just a couple of minutes for the continuation of our celebration. Until then, I have one surprise for everyone. And I will carry on in English because I've realized after I spoke that actually many of our non-Romanian guests did not have headsets, which we offered at the entrance. We had simultaneous translation for everyone, and I apologize deeply if we ended up with some of you not understanding everything which was said tonight. I had the privilege to be here on stage tonight on behalf of my partners, and I wished that everyone, all of them, could be here with me. But of course that was logistically not possible, so we prepared a short video which we will play for you in a moment, such that we send you give you our collective salute and thank you. And obviously I renew my thanks for everyone who was here tonight and to those who followed us on live. And before I close, and I invite you to watch the video and then engage with our guests and then enjoy the rest of the evening, I would like to thank, last but not least, our wonderful marketing team who has made this event possible and actually our entire anniversary campaign possible. So thank you, Ruxandra Bandila, who's brilliantly leading this team. Thank you, Frida Iordache, Oana Angel, Andra Popa, Oana Iosifescu, Roxana Ionescu, Cristina Marcu, Mihai Ghețu, and all the other colleagues who have contributed. Thank you, everyone. It's been a glorious evening. Enjoy the rest of it. And thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you.